Imagine the following scene: it's dawn, the silence of the night is broken by a distressing cry from your 3-year-old son's room. You wake up startled and run there, just to find it sitting on the bed, sweating cold, your eyes wide of terror, while there is a bumping phrases that freeze your soul. I can't breathe. The mine is flooding. I tried to save my companions. And then, with a voice that doesn't seem to leave a child, he looks straight at you and says, Mom, I'm Jamie. I died in that mine. This is not a film plot. It is not an invented story to scare. This really happened in Monclova, Mexico, and what you will hear now will shake everything you think about knowing about life, death, and what can exist beyond them. It was a night of October 2025. The fresh air of northern Mexico entered the cracks of the windows of the Hernandez house, a simple, working family, who would never imagine that his ordinary life would become one of the most documented reincarnation cases in the country. Emiliano, his only son, was born exactly 30 days after one of the greatest tragedies of mining in Coahuila. His parents, Marcela and Roberto, never forgot that date, as the whole region had been following the desperation of the 10 miners in the mine Pinabe, a coal deposit that collapsed and filled with water in mysterious circumstances. They lived in a modest 2-story house in the bureaucrata's neighborhood of Monclova. Roberto was a mechanic in a city steelmaker, and Marcela, a nurse at the local hospital. His routine was common: morning cafes with homemade bread, afternoons watching drawings, nights packing his son on his lap. Emiliano had been a normal baby. He was hungry, smiled when he saw his parents, slept deeply. But at 2 years, strange things started to happen. Things that, at first, they ignored, attributing to passenger fears. The boy had an inexplicable dread of running water. Not from the water from the bathtub or the glass, but the sound of strong torrents. When it rained a lot, Emiliano hid under the bed, trembling. If Roberto washed the car with the hose in jet forte, the child ran into the house, shouting. It was also panicked in closed places, in the mall elevator, in the car with the windows closed, even in the bathroom if the door was locked. His parents thought it was just a phase, like so many fears that children have. But everything changed at dawn in October, when Emiliano was 3 years and 2 months old. The cry that came out of his throat was not the cry of a common nightmare. It was a visceral lament, as if it came from the bowels of the earth. I can't breathe. The water is rising fast, help me. Marcela ran to her son's room. The moonlight was filtered through the dinosaur-printed curtains, projecting dense shadows on the walls. She found Emiliano sitting, her body covered with a cold sweat, her eyes fixed on something he only saw. My love, it was just a bad dream, she whispered, hugging him, feeling the boy's heart fired at his chest. But Emiliano pushed her with a force that did not match her age. I'm not your love. I'm Jamie. I need to tell Elena I love her. I need to tell you that I tried to go home. The words came out of his mouth with a frightening clarity. It was not the acute and sweet voice of a 3-year-old child. It was serious, mature, as if talking about a very distant place. Marcela felt her legs trembling. Elena. That name sounded familiar to her, but she couldn't remember where. Fear climbed through his spine like a cold wind. Roberto appeared at the door, aroused by the screams, his unkempt hair, wearing the striped t-shirt he wore to sleep. What is it, Emiliano? Is everything okay? The boy turned to him with a look that his parents had never seen before. It was a tired look, loaded with deep sadness, incompatible with his young age. For a moment Roberto had the strange feeling of being before an adult man stuck in his son's body. Dad Roberto, I'm not Emilian. I'm Jamie Montalongo Perez. I was 61 when I died at Mina El Pinabe on August 3, 2022. The silence that followed was so heavy that you could cut with a knife. Roberto and Marcela exchanged glances full of terror and confusion. The zoo air condition. MBIA softly, and from the street came the far from a dog. Neither knew how to deal with those impossible words that a child of that age should not know. But what came then made them even more paralyzed. I had already left the mine, Dad Roberto. I was already on the platform, ready to leave with my Elena, when I heard the noise of the water. I learned that my companions were in danger. Emiliano spoke with a calm that contrasted with the desperation of minutes before. His little hands moved as he told the story, as if describing something he had recently lived. I had to go back. I couldn't leave the boys down there. The Ramon was close to the exit, and Sebastian. Poor Sebastian, he had just been a father. His baby was only 2 months old. Marcella felt the world turn around her. He sat on the edge of his son's bed, trying to assimilate those words. Roberto remained standing, his arms crossed, his rational mind seeking a logical explanation for that. Emiliano, my son. Where did you hear these names? Has anyone told you this story? The boy looked at her with infinite patience, as if explaining something obvious to another adult. Mama Marcella, I know it's hard to understand, but I remember everything. I remember the smell of coal that stuck to my clothes. I remember the weight of helmet number 47 in my head. I remember the calloused hands after so many years working underground. He reached out his chubby hands to the moonlight that entered the window. Look, now I don't have those hands anymore. Now it's a child's hands, but here, he touched his chest. I'm still Jamie. Roberto approached and sat on the other side of the bed. His father's instinct fought against the fear of the unknown. That was his son, the boy he had seen born, who had carried in his lap forever. But the words that came out of his mouth were of a stranger. Son, can you tell us more about this mine? How was where you worked? Emilian's eyes shone, as if finally someone had asked the right question. It was very deep, Dad Roberto. 60 meters below Earth. To get down, we used an elevator that made a deafening noise, like when the refrigerator breaks and begins to rang. The walls were black by the coal, as if they had been painted by the shadow of the earth, and the air weighed damp, just that only those who have smelled the long rain soaking the dirty patio knows. Emiliano lifted into bed, the eyes now more alive than Roberto never saw. I worked at Tunnel B7, Dad. The farther from the main entrance. 30-2 years descending in that mine. 30-2 years. His once fragile voice, like that of any child, was gravity that did not belong to that small throat. Since my 20-9. Elena and I had just gotten married. Marcella and Roberto exchanged a look, just that who doesn't need words to carry the weight of a shared fear. The details were too much. Too much for a 3-year-old boy. Too much for anyone who had not lived that. And how was she, Elena, my love? Asked Marcella, the trembling voice, as if each syllable pulled her to a place where she didn't want to go. Emiliano's face has become. Seriousness gave way to such a sweet, such adult smile that it seemed a tear time inside that room. Elena is the most beautiful woman in the world, Mom. Brown hair, always stuck in a low ponytail. I wore small pearl earrings I gave her on our 5th birthday. He paused, as if he were seeing something beyond the wall. There are a scar here, touched his chin with tiny fingers, from when it fell playing with the sisters when it was small. And her beans. Ah, the beans. His eyes shone, as if the taste was still in the tongue. The best of Sabinas. I would put a bay leaf and a little epazote. And the flour tortillas, they crumbled in the mouth. I always waited for me, no matter how long I arrived. Hot bath, ready dinner. A tear ran down his face. I had promised that I was going to retire soon. We already had almost all the money to open our vendimia. Elena wanted to sell homemade food, and I was going to help. Never, Nina, I said. This darkness never again. The face, wiping the tears like a tired man. But on August 3rd, when I heard the roar of the water entering the main tunnel, I learned that I couldn't leave. Ramon shouted. The others too. The water was rising fast, Dad Roberto. Very fast. Roberto felt his throat close. It was not the voice of a child. It was the voice of someone who was there. What happened next, son? Emiliano closed his eyes, as if the scene was recorded behind the eyelids. I ran back to the tunnel. The water was already on my knees. Cold. Dirty. I shouted for the boys to come where I was, because I knew a shortcut that was faster. His breathing was panting, as if reliving the panic. But the water climbed faster than I thought. When I saw it, I was already around the waist. The Ramon held on a beam, but Sebastian. He suddenly opened his eyes, staring at his parents with an intensity that froze them. Sebastian disappeared underwater. I tried to swim to him, but the current was too strong. And then, everything was black. The silence that followed was so dense that it seemed to have weight. Marcella held the edge of the bed, the white fingers of so tight. Roberto ran his hands through his hair, as if he could pull out the words he had just heard. Outside, Coahuila's wind shook the mosque branches, throwing trembling shadows on the walls, as if until night she was containing her breath. Emiliano, Roberto's voice came out. Do you know that Jamie Montalongo was a real person? Do you know what happened on that mine? The boy nodded, slow, solemn. I know, Dad Roberto. Because I was this person. And Elena, she's still waiting for me. In the following days, the Hernandez house was loaded with attention that no one could name. Roberto was going to work at the mechanical workshop, Marcella was fulfilled her shifts at the hospital, but Emiliano's words echoed between them as a bell that would not stop for the trend. The boy, in turn, had only been a boy again. He played with carts, asked for drawings before bed, laughed when the dog licked his face. But there were things. Small details that would once go unnoticed and now shivered the skin. On Wednesday, while Marcella moved the eggs rancheros and Roberto flipped the newspaper on her cell phone, Emiliano released, Mom, why don't you make a pan beans like Elena did? She was a bay leaf and a little of Empa. The spatula fell from Marcella's hand. In 16 years of marriage, she had never placed loose an episode in the beans. Never. My love, where did you learn this recipe? Emiliano looked at her with those eyes that kept centuries. Elena did so on Sundays. He says the secret was to cook slowly, without haste. And put love. Roberto lifted his head from his cell phone, the cold stomach. Son. Do you remember the house where Elena lived? The boy straightened into his chair, as if he had waited that question all his life. It was hopscotch, with a large window in the room that gave to the street. The metal gate was green and rangy horrors when we opened. Elena always said that she needed to pass oil in the hinges, but we never did. His small hands drew the house in the air. In the backyard, we had 3 chickens, the Harita, the Priot and the Colorada. Elena talked to them like people. And there was a line that gave the most sour lemons in the neighborhood. Roberto and Marcella looked at each other, the heart beating unzipped. Those details were real. Too real. And where was this house, son? In the colony doctor's, Dad Roberto. Very close to the Benito Juarez school. Elena worked there as secretary. Every day she went on foot, and in the afternoon waited for me at the door of the mine with a hot coffee bottle. Emiliano took a sip of chocolate, his eyes away. She wore a blue dress with white flowers on Fridays. He says it was the lucky dress. And always smelled of roses. The tears came back, thin like silver wires. I kept love letters to her in the pocket of my work jacket. I wrote when I was bored in the mine, waiting for time to pass. I was talking about her, how much I missed her. She closed her eyes, as if read something written in memory. In the last letter, on the day of the flood, I wrote, My beautiful Elena, when I get out of the mine today, we'll celebrate. Enough for our business. Never wake up at 5 in the morning. Never get home again with black coal hands. The air in the kitchen was heavy. Roberto swallowed, his hands shaking. And what else did you write, Emiliano? The boy opened his eyes, and for a second, he was no longer a child. He was a man looking through time. I wrote that I was going to buy a bouquet of white roses on the way home. That she deserved the world, but while we couldn't give the world, we were going to give love. Every day. Silence. Outside, the wind howled between the branches of mesquites, as if the earth itself was crying. Let's be happy selling your delicious food. I love you more than my own life. And he signed, as always, your Jamie, who loves you. The silence that followed was torn by the shrill sound of a cup shattering on the floor. Marcella had let out her coffee and now stared at her son with wide eyes, as if he was seeing a ghost.
Emiliano. You said you had a helmet with a number. 47, Mom.
His voice was clear, firm, without the hesitation of a 3-year-old.
Helmet number 47. It was my lucky number. I used it since I started working at Pinabe.
Roberto got up from the table with a sudden movement, the chair gritting against the ceramic floor.
Marcella, we need to talk. Now.
They went out to the backyard, where the morning sun warmed the pepper plants that it cultivated in clay pots, as if the world outside was still normal.
Roberto, this cannot be coincidence, she whispered, giving a look at the house, making sure Emiliano would not hear them. The details he is giving are too specific. How would a 3-year-old know about love letters written by a dead minor?
He ran his hands on his face, feeling the weight of something he couldn't explain.
There has to be a logical explanation. Children absorb information from everywhere. Maybe you have seen something on TV, heard some conversation. What talk, Roberto?
His voice went up, tense.
When did we talk about the tragedy of Pinabe? When we mentioned names of minors or intimate details of their lives?
It was then that Emiliano appeared at the backyard door, dragging his favorite fire cart.
Parents, why are they talking softly? Is it about me?
Roberto crouched, placing himself at his son's eye level.
Emiliano, we need to understand better what you told us yesterday. Would you be willing to tell us more about Jamie and Elena?
The boy's eyes shone, as if lighting a light inside. Of course, but first I have to tell something very important. He approached, lowering his voice as one who reveals a sacred secret.
Elena has a moon-shaped mark on her left shoulder. A sign that looks like a growing moon.
I always said it was where God had touched her before sending her to the earth.
The world stopped. Roberto and Marcella felt the floor open under their feet. And how do you know this, my love? Marcella asked, the trembling voice like leaf in the wind.
Emiliano smiled, with the purity of those who do not understand the weight of their own words.
Because I loved her so much, Mom. When we love someone like that, we decorate every piece of it. That afternoon, after Emiliano fell asleep in front of the TV, Roberto made a decision that would change his lives forever. Marcella, let's investigate. Let's find out everything we can about Jamie Montalongo Perez.
They did not know, but they were about to confirm that every word out of their 3-year-old son was absolutely true.
Roberto could not close his eyes that night. Whenever I tried, I saw Emiliano's serene face describing letters that he should never have read, details he should never know.
At 5 a.m, he stood in silence and went to the old computer in the corner of the room. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face as he typed, his trembling fingers, Jamie Montalongo Perez.
Mine El Pinabe. Sabinas, Coahuila. 2022. The first results appeared instantly. Manx from local newspapers, official reports, testimonials from family members.
Her heart fired reading, Hero Minero dies trying to save companions to the Pinabe. Jamie Montalongo, the 61-year-old hero who returned to save his friends. 10 miners die in tragic flood in Sabinas.
With sweaty hands, clicked N. The first article.
The photograph that appeared on the screen stole her breath, a dark man with gray hair, smiling next to a middle-aged woman, brown hair tied in a ponytail.
The physical description hit exactly what Emiliano had told about Elena. Roberto devoured the text, each paragraph confirming the details his son had mentioned. The age of Jamie.
The fact that he had already left the mine, but returned to hear the cries of help.
Your retirement plan to start a business with your wife. But that was when he found an interview with Maria Elena Chavez, Jamie's widow, that Roberto felt the floor shake.
My husband was already on the surface, she had declared to the reporter, her voice embargoed. I had finished its shift and was ready to come home. But when I learned that the mine was flooding, it ran back to help. This was Jamie.
He never left anyone behind.
The woman continued, he promised me that she was going to retire soon.
We had already saved to open an economic kitchen.
Jamie said she was tired of the mine, who wanted to help me sell my home food. Roberto read with wide eyes, his heart beating so hard that it hurt.
My husband worked on Tunnel B7.
I always wore helmet number 47, because I said it was his lucky number.
He worked in that mine 32 years ago. The article brought more intimate details. Elena was secretary at Benito Juarez Primary School. The couple lived in the doctor's neighborhood.
Jamie had a habit of writing letters of love he kept between his work things.
We found a letter in the pocket of her minor jacket, she had said, the tears dripping. It was from the day of the accident. He said that when he left, we were going to celebrate, that he had already gathered enough money for our business. He signed as always, you Jamie, who loves you. Roberto pushed the computer's chair dizzy. All. Absolutely everything Emiliano had told was there, confirmed, recorded.
Marcella appeared in the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes.
What are you doing so early, love?
He looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of terror, astonishment, and such a deep confusion that it seemed to have crashed her soul in the middle.
Marcella. Come here. You need to see this.
She approached the screen, and as she read, the blood was abandoning her face.
My God, Roberto. Everything that Emilian said. Everything is true.
He pointed to a photograph, Elena Chavez on her husband's funeral, wearing a blue dress with small white flowers. The blue dress with flowers, Marcella muttered, her voice failing. He said Elena wore such a dress on Fridays.
Roberto continued to sail until he found a more detailed report about the accident.
There was, Ramon Gutierrez, one of the dead miners, had been found clinging to a supportive beam, just as Emiliano had described. And Sebastián Morales, another victim, was the father of a 2-month-old baby at the time of the tragedy.
Roberto, that.
Marcella's voice got lost in the air, as if the words were not enough to contain what they were both feeling.
It was not coincidence. It was not imagination. It was much bigger and much more terrifying than any explanation the world could offer.
Impossible, Marcella whispered, as if the word itself weighing more than the air between them.
There is no way Emiliano knew these details. He was born a month after the accident. It was just a baby when it all happened.
It was then that they heard light steps down the stairs. Emiliano appeared in the living room, rubbing his sleepy eyes, hugging his brown plush puppy, already spent on time.
Why are you awake, Dads? It's time to go to school.
Roberto and Marcella exchanged a loaded look of something that had no name. Emiliano, come here, my love, called Marcella, extending her arms. The boy nestled on his lap, and Roberto turned the computer screen toward his.
Son, do you recognize this person? In the photo, Elena Chavez's face watched them, accompanied by the newspaper's headline.
Emilian's eyes shone, not like those of a curious child, but like those of someone who recognizes lost love.
It's Elena. It's my beautiful Elena.
He slid his mother's lap and approached the screen, touching the woman's face with small, almost reverent fingers.
She's so sad. Here. Of course, it's because I died and she was alone.
Roberto felt his throat close.
Emiliano. Do you remember the house where you lived with Elena?
Of course yes, Dad. Roberto. The boy smiled, as if the question was obvious.
Do you want me to draw for you?
Without waiting for an answer, he ran to his room and returned with a wax box and a blank sheet. He sat on the room and began to draw lines with precision that froze his parents' spine. For 20 minutes, their small fingers created a yellow house with a green gate, a large window in front, a backyard with a tree and 3 chickens.
Here we lived, he said, pointing to the drawing. And here is the lemon tree, which gave some very sour lemons.
Roberto compared the drawing with the photos he had found online from the Montelongo house.
The resemblance was scary. Emiliano. Marcella's voice trembled. Would you like to know Elena?
The boy's face illuminated as if someone had lit a light inside.
Seriously, Mama? Could I see Elena again? His eyes shone with pure, almost supernatural joy.
I want to tell her that I miss it so much, and I'm sorry to have died before fulfilling my promise to get out of the mine. Roberto and Marcella looked at each other. They knew they were about to cross a line of which there would be no return. That same afternoon, Roberto asked for the workshop. Marcella exchanged her shift at the hospital. The next day, the three would get into the family car to Sabinas, Coahuila, a 2-hour trip that would change everything. They had no idea that they were about to live one of the most extraordinary reunions ever registered. Roberto's white Tsuru advanced on the federal road, the noon sun burning the asphalt. In the back bench, Emiliano was looking out the window with an expression too mature for his 5 years, a mixture of longing and anxiety, as if returning home after a long absence. "It's close, Dad Roberto," he said suddenly. "When we see the welcome to Sabinas sign, we took the second departure. Elena lives near the center. Where is the pharmacy of Mr. Guadalupe?" Once again, Roberto and Marcella exchanged the look, the same one that had been changing since it all started. How did Emiliano know references from a place he had never visited? "Do you remember the way to Elena's house, my love?" Marcella asked, turning back. "Of course, Mom." The boy answered as if it were obvious. "From the school where she worked is exactly 6 blocks on foot. We passed the store of SCU Ramiro, then the house of Dr. Mendez, which has a wire fence, and there is our yellow house." Our. Marcella's word was almost a sigh. Emiliano spoke as if that house was his. As if Elena were, in fact, his wife. And when they entered Sabinas, Roberto followed every indication of the boy, who recognized each street, every construction, every detail with a precision that challenged reason. "There is the bakery where Elena bought sweet bread on Sundays." He pointed to a small establishment with green sign. "And there is the canteen where I had a beer with friends of the mine." Roberto parked in front of Benito Juarez Primary School. "Emiliano, are you sure Elena worked here?" "Yes, Dad Roberto. In the direction room. She took care of all the important roles of the school." The three got out of the car. It was Friday afternoon, and the school was closed, but a man in a straw hat sweeping the courtyard. Roberto approached. "Sorry, Lord. Did you know a secretary who worked here, called Elena Chavez?" The man raised his eyes. "Elena Chavez? Of course. Dona Elena worked here for many years. A very good lady, very responsible. But it's been a couple of years to retired." Roberto felt his heart to fire. "Do you know where she lives?" "Yes, it lives nearby, in the Cologne Doctors, about 6 blocks from here. A yellow house with a green gate." Marcella held Roberto's arm hard. The coincidences were no longer coincidences. "Could you tell us exactly?" The vigilante gave the instructions, the same as Emiliano had described in the car. As they walked, the boy was pointing places with disturbing familiarity. There lived Dona Carmen, the neighbor who had many cats. And that blue house was from Hern. Whereas, who had a son studying for teacher. Roberto stopped suddenly. "Emiliano, how do you know the names of neighbors?" The boy looked at him with that infinite patience, as if explaining something obvious to someone who didn't understand yet. "Dad Roberto, I lived here 32 years. I knew everyone in the neighborhood. And then, they arrived. A yellow house with a rusty green gate, just as in Emiliano's design. The hinges ranked, as if they were not open for a long time." Roberto played the bell with his handy hands. After a few seconds, they heard steps approaching. A female voice asked on the other side. "Who is it?" "Good afternoon, lady. We are Roberto and Marcela Hernandez, from Monclova. We would like to talk to Mrs. Elena Chavez." A long silence. Then the door opened just enough to reveal a face. A 60-year-old woman, graceful brown hair stuck in a bun, wore small pearl earrings. It was her. Just as Emiliano had described. "I'm Elena Chavez." His eyes examined them curiously. "How can I help them?" Roberto opened his mouth, but the words were lost. "Why, how do you explain to a stranger that your 5-year-old son claims to have been her husband in another life?" Woman could wish. "And now, somehow impossible, you have come back to me." The words came out between sobs, as if each syllable carried the weight of decades of longing. Emiliano, no, Jamie buried his face on her shoulder, inhaling that family lavender and coffee perfume that always accompanied her. It was the same smell that calmed him after the exhausting shifts in the mine, the same that made him feel at home even in the hardest days. "I miss you so much, Elena," the boy whispered, with a voice that, for a moment, sounded older than time. "Every day, when I wake up in this small body, the first thing I think is about you." In his wrinkled hands making tortillas in the morning. In the way you frowned when I left the towel wet on the bathroom floor. Elena held him tightly, as if he feared he could disappear at any time. Her fingers, marked by the years of work, were shaking by caressing the boy's dark hair. "And me?" he asked, his voice broken. "I thought of you every day, Jamie. To this day, when I see a miner passing the street, my heart too. Because I know it should be you coming home." Roberto and Marcella watched the scene in silence, with damp eyes. There was no more room for doubt. That was not just a game of children's imagination, not a macabre coincidence. It was much bigger, something that challenged logic, science, even faith. "Elena," Roberto finally broke the silence, a thick voice of emotion. "We don't know how it happened. We don't know why it happened. But one thing is certain, our son loves you. And somehow he is you." Marcella nodded, wiping her tears with her back. "Since Emiliano started talking, he asked to come here. It cried when we said we didn't know where you lived. And now we understand." Elena looked at them, as if she first saw them. Not as intruders, but as guardians of a miracle. You took care of him," he said, with gratitude overflowing. "Even without understanding, even with fear, you loved him." "We love him because we didn't understand," Marcella corrected, with a sad smile. "Because, from the first day, he looked at us with such old eyes, so full of things that they didn't belong to a child, and yet he was ours. Our boy." Elena closed her eyes, as if trying to absorb all that. When he opened them again, there was a determination in them, the same one that Jamie must have had when he last came down in the mine, knowing the risks, but going anyway. "I won't let him leave again," he said, with a firmness that he left no room for discussion. "Not this time." Roberto and Marcella exchanged a look. They knew what that meant. It was not a threat, nor a request. It was a promise. And for the first time since everything started, they were not afraid. Because somehow Jamie had finally returned home. Elena felt the weight of those beliefs in the palm of her hand as if they were the last evidence of a love that death could not erase. The air in the room had been dense, loaded with the true, none of them could ignore it anymore. They were not coincidences. They were not fantasies of a distressed mind. It was him. It was Jamie, somehow inexplicable, looking at her through the eyes of that boy who had barely begun to live. "There is something more than I need to tell you," Emilian's voice was a fragile, but impossible to break. "Something I never told you, not even in our best days." Elena held her breath. He knew, by the tone, that those words would be like a knife, necessary but painful. "The night before the accident, I dreamed of you," the boy continued, his small fingers lightly squeezing the fabric of her shirt, as if she feared she could disappear. "It wasn't a nightmare like the others. It was different. You were in a garden full of sunflowers, just like what we saw on that trip to Saltillo. And you told me not to enter the mine the next day. Pleading. But I didn't hear." The tears ran down Elena's face without even trying to wipe them down. That memory was hers. Only her. She had never told anyone about the dream she had had that same night, a feeling so alive that she woke up screaming, her heart on her jumps, as if she already knew that something irremediable was to happen. "I dreamed of you too," he whispered, my voice broken. "And I woke up with the certainty that something bad was going to happen. But when I called you in the morning, you just laughed and said I was being silly. That nothing was going to happen to you." Emiliano, Jamie, he had his eyes for a moment, as if the fault still crushed him, even after all those years. "I lied to you. I didn't want you to worry. But the truth is that when I went down that morning, I knew. I knew I wasn't going back.
And yet, I went. The silence that followed was so deep that even their breathing seemed to echo.
Roberto and Marcella exchanged a loaded look of a mutual understanding. They were facing something greater than them, greater than logic, greater than life itself. It was as if time had bent, allowing two souls, separated by death, finally found themselves in the only place where they could still touch, in memory, in pain, in the love that no tune could bury.
Did you know? Elena repeated, not as an accusation, but who finally understands the weight of a truth kept for too long. And yet it left me here, alone.
It was not by choice. Emiliano shook his head, his eyes shining with an ancestral sadness.
I would have given anything to stay. But the mine, she had already decided. And I couldn't fight it.
Elena pulled him against him, as if he could, in that hug, undo years of loneliness. The smell of Emiliano's children's shampoo mingled with the lavender perfume that Jamie always used, a fragrance that suddenly seemed to float in the air, as if he were there, not only in the boy's words, but present, somehow tangible.
So why now? He asked, his trembling lips against Emiliano's forehead. Why come back now, after so long?
The boy, that was no longer just a boy, he smiled, and in that smile there was all the wisdom of a man who had loved, lost, and yet found a way to return.
Because you never let me go, me love. Because every night, when it lit the candle in the room, when you talk to me like I'm still by your side, you call me back. And this time, the universe listened. Roberto swallowed hard, his hands closed on his lap. Marcella cried silently, the tears falling over the handkerchief between her fingers.
They had brought Emiliano there seeking answers, but what they found was something much greater, proof that love does not die. That, in some way inexplicable, he persists, giving time, space, and even death itself.
And now? Elena asked, as if she feared the answer. What happens when he leaves again?
Emiliano stroked her face with a tenderness that did not belong to those little fingers. It was the gesture of a man who had spent a life touching that same face, memorizing every line, every scar, every laugh. This time, it won't be forever. I promise. Her voice was almost a sigh.
You'll feel me in the wind when you pass the window.
You will hear me in the music that plays on the radio without anyone having called.
And when you close your eyes at night, you'll see me waiting. For you.
On the other side of the sunflowers. Elena squeezed him harder, as if he could, by the pure strength of desire, prevent him from leaving. But she already knew, in the back of her soul, that some farewells are not final.
They are just, until soon.
And when the afternoon light entered the window, bathing everyone in a hard golden shine, Emiliano, that boy who carried a man's soul, he last time. Take care of her for me, he said, looking at Roberto and Marcella. Because she will still need you. And then, as if his time had suspended his breath, Emilian's small body relaxed in Elena's arms, his eyes closed slowly, like petals at dusk. When she looked down, there was no doubt.
Jamie had said goodbye.
I never had a chance to tell you before I died. The words echoed in the air like a long sigh, dragged by years of silence. Elena sank to the floor, her knees pressing the worn carpet, and wrapped the small hands of Emiliano among her hands that, despite their tender age, already knew the weight of work, the warmth of the cold of the farewell.
Tell me, my love.
And then, with a voice that trembled between memory and pain, the boy began. On the day of the accident, before going down to the mine, I went to Dr. Ramirez.
Elena's eyes widened, her breath stuck between her teeth. Remember I was a lot of coughing in the last few weeks?
She nodded, the tears dripping without permission. Each word was a knife spinning slowly in the chest.
The doctor said I had the first signs of pneumoconiosis. Coal in the lungs. Emiliano lowered his head, as if the weight of it were too much to a soul that no longer belonged to the body anymore. He warned me, if I continued on the mine, my health would get worse. Very. Elena took her hands to her mouth, choking a scream that was born from the bottom of her throat. Why did you never tell me? Because I didn't want you to suffer, my love. The boy's fingers tightened her, weak but determined. But that's why I was so determined to retire soon. Not only for our plans with the business, but because my body couldn't stand it anymore. Elena's cry became a broken sob,
tearing the silence of the room. If you had told me, I would have forced you to stop at the same time. I didn't care about the money, Jamie. I didn't care about anything. I know. Emiliano's voice was a wire of melancholy. And I regret not telling you. But I wanted to make sure we would have enough before I left. That you would not need. It was then that the sun, as if it also cried, began to lie on the horizon, painting the room with a melted gold, so intense that everything seemed to float in a dream. Or in a memory. Elena pulled Emiliano against him, squeezing him as if he could merge into his own heart. Are you going back to visit me, Jamie? The boy looked at her with a sadness that did not fit in that small face, as if he had centuries of longing. I don't know, me love. The confession was a murmur. I don't understand how it works. I just know that today needed to come. I needed to tell you how much I love you. A break. A sigh. And I needed to ask for forgiveness for leaving you alone. Elena shook her head, tears wetting the boy's hair. You never left me alone. Your love was with me all these days. Every morning I woke up thinking I wouldn't make it. Every night I dreamed of his voice. She pressed her forehead against his. You were here. Always. Roberto approached, discreetly, as if he feared breaking that moment with his presence. Senora Elena. Her voice was low, respectful. It's already nightfall. We need to go back to Monclova. He hesitated. But if you want you can visit us when you wish. Emiliano, he corrected, as if the real name were a sacred secret. Jamie will always be welcome here. Elena smiled through her tears, a broken but grateful smile. Thanks. His voice failed. You have no idea of the gift they gave me today. Before they departed, she took a yellowish photograph out of her pocket. She and Jamie on wedding day, laughing at the altar, young, eternal. He handed it to Emiliano, his fingers shaking. So you don't forget. The boy held the image as if made of glass, his eyes shining with something that was no more sadness, but a deep peace. I'll never forget you, Elena. Promised. N. In this life, nor in any other. The way back to Monclova was a river of silence. In the back bench, Emiliano slept, embraced photography, with a smile so serene that Roberto and Marcella exchanged looks without words. They had witnessed something that had no explanation, something that would forever change the way they saw the world, love, and those invisible wires that weave destinations beyond what the eyes can see. And while the car wheels devoured the road, a truth was hanging in the air, lightly as a stardust. Some farewells are not final. They are just bridges.